people retire with the exact same $1 million on the very same day. Same savings, same investments, same yearly spending, same average market return. 25 years later, one of them has over $2 million left. The other is nearly broke, scraping by on what little remains. Same money in, same money out, same average return, a stunning difference in the end. The only difference between them was one thing: when the market crashed. Not if it crashed. Markets always crash eventually, only when it happened to hit. For one retiree, the crash came late after decades of growth, barely a scratch. For the other, the crash came early, in the first few years. It was devastating. This is the single most dangerous, least understood risk in all of retirement. And there is one simple move at age 60 that protects you from almost all of it. Meet Robert. He is turning 60, and he is about 5 years from retiring. 60 feels like a finish line he has been running toward for 40 long years. But 60 is not the finish line. It is the most delicate stretch of the entire race. Robert did everything right. He saved, he invested, he avoided foolish risks. But Robert is about to walk into the most fragile money years of his entire life. And almost nobody warned him about the danger waiting on the other side of that line. It will not cost you a fortune. It will not require a genius or a guru. It is one calm decision, made in advance, that quietly disarms the whole danger. It is the one move that protects every other good decision you have already made. Skip it, and one unlucky year can undo 40 years of careful saving. Do it, and almost nothing the market throws at you can knock you off course. So today, this is the best retirement advice you will ever hear. Do this at 60. Picture Robert at his kitchen table, a retirement folder open in front of him. Every number in that folder looks healthy: $1 million saved, a paid-off house, low debt. On paper, Robert is completely ready to retire. The plan looks bulletproof. But paper plans do not survive a badly timed crash. Robert does not know that yet. One question decides everything. What happens if the market falls right as he retires? First, understand why 60 is so different from every age that came before it. For your whole working life, a market crash was almost a gift in disguise. At 40, a crash meant your regular contributions simply bought stocks on sale. You had decades ahead for those cheap shares to recover and soar. Time was your friend. But at 60, everything quietly flips. Two things change at exactly the same moment. First, you stop adding money. The contributions that once bought the dips simply stop. Second, you start withdrawing. Now you are pulling money out, not putting it in. So a crash at 60 hits while you are selling, not buying. That reverses everything. Instead of buying cheap shares, you are forced to sell cheap shares just to eat. And every cheap share you sell is a share that can never recover for you. That is the trap. Selling low locks in the loss and steals your future recovery. The years around 60 have a name among planners: the retirement red zone. Roughly the 5 years before and the 5 years after you retire. The fragile decade. What happens in that narrow window can decide the entire rest of your financial life. No fear-mongering here, though. This is a solvable problem with a boring, simple fix. So let us keep it fair and specific. Here is what the data actually shows. Think of your savings during work as a bathtub you are steadily filling up. A crash is like briefly draining some water, but the faucet is still pouring more in. In retirement, that filling faucet shuts off completely for good. Now, the only thing moving water is the drain of your monthly withdrawals. So a crash now is a drain that suddenly opens much wider, with nothing refilling it. That is why the same crash that helped you at 40 can sink you at 60. To see this clearly, let us line up Robert against a second unlucky retiree. Meet Ivonne. She also retired at 65 with the very same $1 million. Ivonne was not reckless. She was not greedy. She simply retired at the wrong moment. Just months after she retired, the market fell sharply. A deep, scary downturn. Ivonne still needed $50,000 that year to live, so she had to sell. She sold her shares at the bottom, at fire sale prices, just to pay her bills. The next year, the market fell again, and again she had to sell low to survive. By the time the market finally recovered, Ivonne had far fewer shares left to grow. The recovery came, but it came for a portfolio that had already been gutted. Now Robert, same million, same spending, but Robert did one thing differently at 60. When the same crash hit Robert early in his retirement, he did not have to sell a thing. He simply let his investments fall and recover, completely undisturbed. How? Because Robert had built a simple buffer that carried him through the storm. Same crash, same portfolio, same spending, one retiree sold low, the other did not. That single difference is the entire gap between running dry and staying rich. It is worth pausing on how unfair Yvonne's outcome truly was. She did not overspend, she did not gamble. She followed all the standard advice. Her only mistake was retiring in a year she could not possibly have predicted. Sequence risk punishes good people for nothing more than unlucky timing. The buffer exists precisely to make you immune to that cruel, random timing. And the fix Robert used is something almost anyone can set up at age 60. Two neighbors, same street, same savings, same crash. One thrived, one struggled. The only thing behind that difference was a small, unglamorous pile of cash. It is the least exciting secret in finance, and one of the most powerful. It is not clever, it is not risky, it is almost embarrassingly simple. Let us build it. Before Robert retired, he sat down with a financial advisor to stress test his plan. The advisor asked one question that changed everything. What if you retire into a crash? They ran Robert's plan through a bad early market and watched it nearly collapse. Robert went pale. His bulletproof plan had one enormous, invisible crack in it. That crack was sequence risk, and the advisor had a simple, boring patch for it. First, understand the enemy. It is called sequence of returns risk. It sounds technical, but the idea is simple. The order of your returns matters. While you are saving, only the average return really matters over the long run. But while you are withdrawing, the order suddenly matters more than the average. Because a loss early, while you are also spending, does damage that never heals. Two people can have the identical average return over 25 years. But if one hits losses early and the other hits them late, their outcomes split wildly. This is why two retirees with the same plan can end up in completely different worlds. Averages are comforting because they smooth over the scary bumps along the way. But you do not live on the average. You live year by year, bump by bump. And a deep bump in the wrong year while you withdraw can end the whole journey. The average return lied to them. The sequence told the real story. Most retirement advice obsesses over average returns. Almost none warns about sequence. Think of two hikers descending a mountain, each carrying the same food supply. One hits the blizzard on day one, weak and far from the bottom. The other near the end. Same mountain, same storm, same supplies. But the early storm is far more deadly. Retirement is that descent, and a crash is the storm you cannot schedule. Which is exactly why so many careful retirees get quietly blindsided. Run the numbers, and the danger of a bad early sequence becomes impossible to unsee. Here is a simple way to feel why order matters so much when you are withdrawing. Imagine climbing down a ladder while someone occasionally saws off a lower rung. If a rung vanishes early near the top, you still have many rungs left to adjust. But if a rung vanishes near the bottom, you can crash straight to the ground. Withdrawing in a crash is sawing off your lowest rungs at the worst possible time. The early losses do not just hurt. They remove the base everything else stood on. Let us put real dollars on it, using Robert and Ivonne's identical million. Both start with 1 million. Both withdraw $50,000 a year to live on. Both experience the exact same set of yearly returns over 25 years. The only difference is the order. One gets the good years first, the bad years last. The lucky retiree, with the crash arriving late, ends with about 2.3 million. Their early good years grew the portfolio so large the late crash barely mattered. The unlucky retiree, with the crash arriving early, ends with about 770,000. Same million, same spending, same average return, a gap of over $1.5 million. $1.5 million, decided purely by the timing of a crash they could not control. Notice that neither retiree did anything different with their investing. Same fund, same spending, same discipline. The market simply dealt them different orders. It feels deeply unfair because it is. Timing you cannot control decided their fate. Which is precisely why smart planning refuses to leave that timing to chance. That is sequence risk in cold, hard dollars. And it is terrifying if you are unprotected. But here is the hopeful part. You cannot control the crash. You can control the sequence. Let us be clear about how common this danger really is. Crashes are not rare events. Over any given retirement, you will almost certainly face at least one major downturn. The question was never whether a storm arrives, only whether you are ready when it does. Ivonne treated the storm as bad luck. Robert treated it as a certainty to prepare for. And controlling the sequence is exactly what the age 60 move is designed to do. So here it is, the single best piece of retirement advice. Build a cash buffer. Before you retire, set aside 2 to 3 years of spending in safe, boring cash. Not in stocks, not in anything that can crash. In cash and short-term safe bonds. If you spend $50,000 a year, that buffer is roughly $150,000. That may sound like a lot, but it is only a slice of a healthy nest egg. On a $1 million portfolio, that buffer is just 15% set safely aside. This buffer is not for growth. It has one single sacred job, to be there in a crash. When the market is up, you spend from your investments as normal and refill the buffer. But when the market crashes, you flip a switch. You stop selling stocks entirely. Instead, you live off the safe buffer and leave your investments completely alone. You give your battered stocks the one thing they desperately need: time to recover. 2, maybe 3 years of buffer is usually enough to outlast most market downturns. By the time your buffer runs low, the market has usually climbed back to health. Then, in the good years, you calmly refill the buffer and start the cycle again. Some planners picture this as buckets. 1 bucket of cash, 1 of bonds, 1 of stocks. You drink from the cash bucket first, and only refill it from stocks in the good times. In a crash, the stock bucket stays sealed, quietly waiting for the market to heal. The name does not matter. Buffer, bucket, cushion. The idea is identical. Keep enough safe money that a bad market can never dictate when you sell. The buffer turns you from a forced seller into a patient, unbothered holder. And a patient holder is exactly who the market rewards over the long run. That is the entire move, a boring cash cushion that quietly changes everything. People hear cash buffer and worry about missing out on stock market gains. But remember, the buffer is only 2 or 3 years of your total nest egg. The vast majority of your money stays invested and growing the entire time. You are not abandoning growth. You are just protecting the years you are most fragile. A small slice of safety unlocks the freedom to leave the big slice completely alone. That trade, a little lost growth for huge protection, is one of the best in all of finance. Let us see exactly how that buffer rescued Robert from Ivonne's fate. When the early crash hit, Ivonne had no buffer, so she sold stocks at the bottom. Robert, facing the same crash, simply spent from his cash buffer instead. His stocks stayed fully invested, so they caught every dollar of the recovery. Ivonne's sold shares caught none of it. They were already gone before the rebound. Same crash, same recovery. One portfolio rode it up, the other missed the whole thing. The buffer did not earn Robert a fortune. It simply stopped him from losing one. When you are still working, a big loss is painful, but ultimately recoverable. But in the red zone, a big loss can permanently reset your entire standard of living. That asymmetry is why defense quietly becomes the most important skill at 60. And in retirement, not losing is very often the whole game. Because a dollar you never lose never needs a heroic recovery to come back. Remember the brutal recovery math. A 20% loss needs a 25% gain. A 30% loss needs a 43% gain just to get back to even. The buffer lets you skip that painful hole entirely by never selling into it. Ivonne fell into that hole and spent years just climbing back to where she began. Robert never fell in, so those same years were pure growth for him instead. The buffer did not make Robert richer than Ivonne by luck. It did it by avoiding disaster. The buffer unlocks a second, powerful move most people leave on the table. It lets you delay claiming Social Security, which quietly boosts your income for life. Every year you wait past full retirement age, your benefit grows about 8%. Wait until 70 and your monthly check can be around 24% larger. That is a guaranteed risk-free raise you simply cannot find anywhere else. But to wait, you need income to live on in the gap years before Social Security starts. That is exactly what the buffer plus your investments quietly provides. Think of delaying as spending a little of your own money to buy a much bigger stream. It is one of the only guaranteed 8% returns a retiree can ever access. You spend from your own money for a few years and let your future check grow larger. So the buffer does double duty. It shields the sequence and bridges the delay. Robert used his buffer to wait and locked in a permanently bigger check for life. Ivonne, with no buffer, was forced to claim early and locked in a smaller one forever. Think about what that delay is really worth over a long retirement. A bigger Social Security check is inflation-protected income that lasts as long as you do. It is like buying yourself a bigger pension using your buffer as the down payment. For many retirees, delaying is the highest return, lowest risk move available to them. And it only becomes possible when a buffer frees you from claiming out of desperation. 2 levers, 1 simple buffer. That is why this single move matters so much. There is one more gift the tax code hands you specifically in your early 60s. At 50, you can already add an extra catch-up to your retirement account each year. But between 60 and 63, that catch-up gets supercharged even higher. In those specific years, the extra catch-up climbs to over $11,000. It is the biggest tax advantage push the system will ever let you make. Instead of the usual $7,500 catch-up, these years allow far more. On top of the standard limit, that is a serious annual boost most people miss. It shrinks your taxes today and fattens your buffer and portfolio at the same time. Robert used those years to top off both his investments and his fresh cash buffer. A few strong years at 60 can meaningfully strengthen everything that follows. Robert's younger coworker Victor assumed all of this could wait until much later, but Robert reminded him the setup happens before the storm, never during it. You cannot build an umbrella once the rain is already pouring down on you. The calm years before retirement are when this whole plan quietly gets built. Picture these final working years as loading supplies before a long expedition. Every extra dollar packed now is one you will not have to scramble for later. Robert treated 60 to 65 as his final deliberate loading season. So the early 60s are not too late. They are your final most powerful setup window. Now here's the twist that reframes what good retirement advice even means. Notice what the best advice was not. It was not pick a winning stock. It was not time the market, or chase a higher return, or find some secret fund. The single best move was simply making sure you never have to sell at the worst moment. Great retirement planning is not about brilliance. It is about removing single points of failure. The buffer is boring, it earns almost nothing, it will never impress anyone at a party. And yet that boring cushion can quietly save you well over $1 million. Here is what actually happens to retirees who chase excitement instead of safety. They reach for a little more return and get wiped out by one badly timed crash. The retiree who wins is almost always the one who was simply the hardest to knock down. Because in the red zone, survival is not part of the strategy. Survival is the strategy. Robert did not need to be brilliant. He only needed to be impossible to force into selling. Ivonne was not foolish. She was simply unprotected at the one moment protection mattered most. It really is that small a hinge for so enormous a difference in outcome. The best money moves are rarely dramatic. They are quiet decisions made early. The difference between them was never intelligence or income. It was one boring buffer. Here is the line worth remembering. Protect the sequence and you protect everything. There is a strange peace that comes from knowing a crash cannot force your hand. While others panic and sell in a downturn, the prepared retiree simply waits it out. That calm is not a personality trait. It is a direct product of the buffer. Preparation is what turns a terrifying crash into a boring, temporary headline. The best retirement advice was never about growing richer. It was about staying safe. Think about how backwards our instincts are as we approach retirement. The closer we get to needing the money, the more tempted we are to reach for more. But that is precisely backwards. The closer you are, the more you should protect. A young investor can afford to be bold because time will forgive their mistakes. A 60-year-old cannot, because time is exactly the thing running short. So the wisdom of 60 is not to swing harder. It is to stop swinging and start guarding. Do this one boring thing at 60 and the scary red zone loses almost all its teeth. So let us bring it home into something you can act on before you ever retire. If you are near 60, your homework is simple and it is not about chasing returns. It is 3 simple steps, and none of them require predicting the market. First, figure out 1 year of your retirement spending, just one honest number. Then multiply it by 2 or 3. That is the cash buffer you want to build. Build that buffer in the years before you retire, calmly and on purpose. You do not need the full buffer overnight. You just need to start building it now. Then, when the first crash comes, and it will come, you simply will not flinch. Write yourself one simple rule now, while the skies are still calm and clear. In a down market, I spend from cash. In an up market, I refill from stocks. A rule set in calm times will steady your hand when the storm finally arrives. You will spend from cash, leave your stocks alone, and let time do the healing. Review it once a year, and refill it whenever a strong market gives you the chance. That yearly 10-minute habit quietly keeps your seatbelt fastened for decades. That one habit can be the difference between Robert's outcome and Ivonne's. Set the buffer up in a separate account, so you are never tempted to spend it early. Keep it dull and safe. High-yield savings, money market, or short-term treasuries. It will not be exciting. It is not supposed to be. It is your financial seatbelt. You do not admire a seatbelt every day. You are just deeply glad it is there in a crash. And if you are already retired, it is not too late to start building this cushion today. Even 1 year of cash set aside can keep you from selling at the very worst moment. Then build toward 2 or 3 years steadily, whenever the market gives you room. Every dollar you move to safety is a dollar a crash can no longer force you to sell. Any buffer is better than none when the next storm inevitably rolls in. Make the decision that matches your reality, not someone else's sales pitch. If this finally made the red zone make sense, subscribe to Robert Money Logic. Hit the notification bell so the next breakdown reaches you at exactly the right moment. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every single day. Robert did not beat the market. He simply refused to let the market beat him. And that quiet refusal, set up years in advance, was worth more than any hot tip. Everything else in retirement gets easier once that single fear is off the table. The market will always crash eventually. Your job is simply to never be forced to sell. Imagine 2 versions of yourself, 15 years into retirement looking back. One built the buffer and sailed calmly through every storm the market threw. The other skipped it, sold in a panic, and spent years quietly anxious about money. The difference between those two futures fits in one small, boring account. You get to choose which of those two people you become. And you choose it at 60. Robert did the boring thing, and boring bought him decades of quiet, unshakable peace. Be the retiree the next crash simply cannot touch. Build your buffer at 60. Do this one thing at 60, and you turn the most dangerous decade into a manageable one.